Welcome everybody, it's Rev. We're doing part 2, chapter 2 of Patty Hobe's Road to the King. Quick review on what is discussed and some short thoughts on what I think about it. As always, helpful if you sub. I know I throw that out there a lot, but the retro Yu-Gi-Oh format community means a lot, so if you help grow the channel, it helps everyone involved. Yeah. So here, the chapter is titled Building Blocks, and it's really subdivided into 4 sub-chapters, if you will. The first one being what Patrick calls the decision-making toolkit. Next is biases and misjudgment. Next is thinking models, and next is motivation. So really with that first sub-chapter, decision-making toolkit, most of what is discussed is just various mental models. Um, And at a very high level, what that breaks down into is decision trees. So this is a very helpful thing to think 1 to 2 plays or even 1 to 2 turns ahead, which is um, if I play this, then my opponent could do one of a few things, and if they have that answer, how hard is the punish? Or if I choose the second play, let's just say play 1 and play 2, the second play, my opponent could have these specific punishes and how bad is that punish. And then you can have a separate decision tree from there, which is, what are my extensions or how am I going to win the game from that, which is, I think every player should be doing. They should think about, like, maybe there's 3 different plays available to them. You can usually cross one off the list immediately, and then you have it down to 2, and then between those 2 plays, not only with what the immediate punish would be, but what the represented game state will likely be based on which you choose. And it's a probabilistic thing too. It's like if you have to play around a 1 of versus playing into a 3 of, and how hard those punishes are, that all goes into the relative weights you're going to make on making those decision trees. And um, the problems that come up with that, are that players will sometimes make the wrong choice, like of the objectively wrong play, and get rewarded for it. Or, you'll make the right play and they just happen to have that answer. Um, like even just recently, I was playing a Academy League game and I was like, well, I simplified the game state. Um, and I knew my opponent was on 3 Kaiku because they were playing Warrior, and I had a BLS in hand in main phase 2. And I said, okay, and I only had enough banishes to summon the BLS. I was like, okay, so he's running 3 Kaiku and he's on 1 card. Uh, so the big punishes, because he had no back row, are Snatch Steal if I summon the Blackluster Soldier, and then he takes it. Or the other punish is that he summons Kaiku and swings when I have nothing on the field and banishes everything, and it's not something I have removal to deal with. So I was thinking, both of those basically lose me the game. Like, yeah, BLS is, worse for him to steal, but I didn't have an out to either of those. So I said I might as well play around the 3 Kaiku because it's 3 times more likely that he has the Kaiku than the Snatch Steal. So I summoned the BLS in main phase 2, and he just happened to have drawn the Snatch Steal. So it's like, well, I guess he got the out. But it still was the correct play to do that, despite the outcome being the worst one. It was 3 times more likely for me to get punished with a Kaiku than it was the Snatch Steal. So kind of the being results oriented thing. And then lastly in mental models was the checklist approach, which is more just focused around like error reduction and has a lot to do with like tournament prep mostly. The next part, and this is probably the least favorite part of the book, despite it, in my opinion, being like the most important one, which is the biases part. So biases and misjudgment. So the way he wrote this chapter was, um, he literally just listed probably 50 plus different biases and like kind of grouped them into different, like there are social biases and like um, uh, incentive-based biases and all that type of stuff. I think he did too much here, um, because as I was reading them, I'm familiar with most of these biases, but there was so much that it was kind of difficult to take anything away. Like, I think if he just focused maybe on like 10 biases at most, like the 10 most important ones, that would have been better. Because the other gripe I have with this section is um, he had a pretty difficult time like applying all of them to like Yu-Gi-Oh based examples. Like there was a lot of like real life examples that like you can like make sense of that bias, but like the Yu-Gi-Oh examples like there just weren't enough of them, and they weren't very good in my opinion. So that's a pretty big critique, just because I think one of the biggest parts of Yu-Gi-Oh is the biases thing. Like as I just mentioned, like you can be extremely biased to be like results oriented and like just look at the result of like what happens versus whether or not like it was the right decision to make with the information you had before you knew the outcome. Um, and like all different types of like biases, like even just like that, like basically everyone that plays this game like really underestimates variance, and like they see somebody with like an 80% win rate like one season or like a tournament win, and like yeah, they're probably a good player, but like that's almost all luck. Like nobody plays at that high of a level. You just don't get 80% win rates in this game. It's just not possible. So like that's just variance. Like if there were a coin flipping competition, there would be someone with a 100% win rate like over a long enough time. Like it's just how normal distributions work. So um, there's a lot that goes into biases, and I just see it all the time with like how people discuss cards or decks or like results of players or win rates. It's just like the whole game is infested with it, and I think it's something that's really under respected. And I think this chapter didn't really do a great job of like going into all of that. Um, Next was the thinking models um, subchapter. So like just a few different ways to like kind of think about the world. So the first one is inversion. So um, like the quote was like invert, always invert, and it's just like if you're trying to solve a problem, thinking about like the inverse of that problem. So like like the example that he gave was like rather than trying to make yourself like if the what you want to solve is like I want to be happy, like the question you should ask yourself would be like what would I need to do to be unhappy? And he goes into like some like maybe being overweight, like doing drinking too much or having bad physical health or like maybe bad company or bad relationships. Like those are all the things that will make you unhappy. So like you just focus on not doing those things as opposed to just trying to answer the question like what will make me happy. It's better to ask what will make me unhappy, which I think is it's very important. Like in an example of Yu-Gi-Oh would be like rather than saying like if I go into this tournament or game or play whatever it is and say like what will make me win, another important question to ask yourself after that might be like what will make me lose, or I guess you could say what would make me not win, whatever you want to say. um, the next thinking model was simplification. A lot of people call it first principles, and it's just like kind of thinking about problems or questions that you have at their like most core uh, like question. It's like just its most distillate form. Um, so as opposed to like getting into like the very nuanced things, like just focusing on like the building blocks of like whatever question or issue you're trying to tackle. The next thing he talks about is focusing on what's knowable and unknowable, which is important. And then lastly, what's useful versus non-useful information. Um, like there's just going to be information that you might be able to obtain and spend a lot of time obtaining, but may or may not really be all of that useful to you. Um, when it comes to winning a tournament or whatever it might be. And then the last thing is the motivation part. So he goes into like the growth mindset, uh, how how you need to like adapt, take risk, don't get complacent, and kind of goes into like just how much time and effort like he put into this game, which is again I think very surprising. Just to know that like there are people out there like just putting this much time into the game without that much monetary reward. But he just kind of had that dog in him, and he just wanted to like get better, and like this was his focus. So more power to him. And then the last thing he talks about in this subchapter was systems as opposed to goals. And his reasoning for this was goals, you focus on the result, and then systems, you focus on the process that leads to that result. Um, and he kind of talks about um, like that. When he had a specific goal that he set for himself and he met that goal, it led him to get complacent. Whereas if you focus on systems, you're kind of on that treadmill of like improvement and the like. So that's pretty much a summary of what was talked about. Again, there's a whole lot to fill in there on the specific examples and biases and all that he talks about. But for now, thanks for watching.